What if I told you that Christians and Hebrew Israelites, my brothers, my genetic family members, have no understanding for why God sent the plagues to Egypt? And sometimes I'm going to use the Greek term or nomenclature Egypt. And sometimes I'll use the term that Moses used in his writings, Mitzrayim. But what if I told you that they do not have the slightest idea why God called Moses? What if I also told you that they also do not understand what Moses wrote, which is the source of all the debating that carries on today on social media? In a series of videos leading to the Passover, which is why I'm doing these videos, I hopefully will show you all the plagues, show you what the plagues mean, and then explain to you why the Passover happened. What was the important understanding of the Passover? What does it mean? And how is it talking about Yahushua? You know, Christians have an idea only because the apostles and in the gospels it talks about Yahushua as being the Passover lamb. But what did Moses intend for us to understand about that event? Essentially, I'm going to provide you details about the death, resurrection of Yahushua Hamashiach from Moses's perspective. You know, there's a lot of talk about the law of Moses, and you know, there's a lot of theories out there, and that's fine because I'm not positioning myself in a place to debate anyone on anything. I'm simply going to provide information, and that information will either agree with what is meant to be understood or it won't. But I have no time for the silly debates. And so I'm going to show you these things. And the first plague that I want to deal with is the plague of the water. Now, the plagues ultimately are against the Pharaoh and what the Egyptians believed about him. Now, I know you see that there is a black Pharaoh here, and there's a lot of misconception, basically, a lot of lies about how the Egyptians looked. And it's very simple. And archaeologists know this. They know that when the walls of the Akkadians and Babylonians and the Egyptians were discovered, they had imagery on those walls that had color. And every group of people, the Akkadians, Babylonians, Sumerians, the Egyptians, they depicted themselves and their gods on the walls. They depicted their gods by how they looked. And so the Egyptians were melanated people, and they believed that their gods were melanated as well. Now, that minus the different imagery involved in the gods that are on their wall, because some had cobra's head, some had a beetle's head in a man's body, but you definitely know that their body had melanin, dark pigmentation. And this is why the authorities in Egypt, who are over Egyptology, that's not the state of Egypt, not the president of Egypt, but the foreign invaders, of Egypt are still in control of Egyptology. That's a fact. And they chose to wash the colors off the temple walls. So you don't know, that is the generations that are come after me, should the Lord tarry, which I doubt. The generations that will come after me won't know that the Egyptians were black. That is at least the aim that they are trying to accomplish. And so the Egyptians were black. And I have a black pharaoh here. And if you are a Christian and you're mad about that, kick rocks, go somewhere else. But ultimately, the plagues are against Pharaoh and what the Egyptians believed about him. I want to begin with the statement that Stephen made. And he says, Moses was instructed in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was powerful in words and in deeds. And I have stated here and there in the video here or two that Moses was technically Egyptian. And that'll get some Hebrew Israelites upset. And I don't really care. Yes, his genetic family is Hebrew by origin, but Moses was adopted by a Nubian pharaoh that you just saw in the last slide at the age of 2 years old and brought up under that Nubian royal family of Pharaoh. And this simply means that Moses thought like the Egyptians thought because he was educated in all the ways of the Egyptians. That's what Stephen is talking about here. And Moses, being a part of the royal house of Pharaoh, he received a highly advanced education in astronomy, astrology, the religious ideas related to the gods, how to build temples and temple structures, pyramids. He was instructed in all of these things. And this is one of the reasons Stephen mentions this part of Moses's life in his statements regarding the history of the house of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Stephen intended for us to look at that. And I should say, God, through Stephen, intended for us to look at what Stephen said about Moses's education, because it is the backbone of everything that he wrote. If you read Joshua 24:14, you will also see that all the sons of Israel who came out of the Exodus were worshiping the gods of the Egyptians. They were, in fact, Egyptian themselves. They thought like Egyptians. They did what the Egyptians did. They worshiped what the Egyptians worshiped, even in their captivity in Mitzrayim. They worshiped the same gods that the Egyptians worshiped. Therefore, they too were technically Egyptian. Why? Because they thought like the Egyptians thought. They believed what the Egyptians believed. They acted how the Egyptians acted. And that's a fact. Many may want to dispute that. And you can do as you wish, but it's undisputable. I'm going to show you. So the Egyptians or the sons of Israel, they too acted like Egyptians. No different from them taking on the beliefs of the Canaanites when they went into the land of Canaan. They did the same thing while in captivity in Egypt. When God approached Moses, he intended to use the things that Moses learned and understood from the Egyptian priests. His intentions, however, was not to be like the Egyptians or to talk about the gods of the Egyptians in the sense that that's something that you have to believe. But God intended to mock the Egyptian belief system, as you will see in the plagues. And he used their imagery to teach the sons of Israel about himself. That's very important. That's very important to understand, because that is seen in what God calls himself by his memorial name and by the use of the Canaanite epithet El, or Elohim, that is used for the pantheon of the Canaanite belief system. If you did not know, the name El and the assembly Elohim comes from the Canaanite Ugaritic Phoenician belief system. And so God was not trying to be El in the sense that he's the Canaanite God. He used the epithet or the title to teach the sons of Israel about himself. That is quite different. And so in this series of videos, we will only deal with the Egyptian belief system, because that's what Moses learned. That's not all that Moses learned in his 40 years being in Egypt, because he learned some other things when he ran away from the Pharaoh and spent 40 years with his father-in-law. All right. Having a little issue with let's see, my slides moving slow. Okay, we're back in business. So now, Joshua 24:14, I'm going to show you that the sons of Israel who came out of the Exodus were worshiping Egyptian gods. It says, so now you fear Yahuwah, and you serve him in guiltlessness and in truth, and you must depart from the gods that your fathers served on the other side of the river and in Mitzrayim, that's Egypt, and you serve Yahuwah. The sons of Israel did not know who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was, which is why Moses asked God, when I come unto the children of Israel and shall say unto them, the God of your fathers have sent me unto you, and they shall say to me, what is his name? I think it pretty logical to understand that if they did not know the name of the God that Moses was bringing to them in stating that he was going to deliver them from the captivity of Egypt, then they did not know who God was. The sons of Israel were living like Egyptians. They adopted the ways of Egypt, and you will see that shortly in how they thought and what they did when they entered into the wilderness after crossing the Red Sea. But you need to get it in your mind that they did not know who the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was. It is a fallacy to believe so. That is not a part of the narrative, the historical narrative. They did not know because they were worshiping the gods of the Egyptians. Now, in Exodus 32:1, I want to show you something about Aaron and the sons of Israel. And in verse 1, it says, the people saw that Moses delayed to descend from the mountain, and the people assembled themselves upon Aaron, and they said to him, arise, make for us gods, plural, that will walk before us. For this Moses, the man that caused us to go up from the land of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him. And so, as you can see, after God had sent all the plagues upon Pharaoh and the land of Egypt, the sons of Israel reverted back to belief in Egyptian gods and Egyptian beliefs. But I want you to clearly understand what they asked, because they asked something very specific. They asked Aaron to make them gods, plural. And the statement is important to understand, because in it you understand what the Egyptians believed. Egyptologists and those who claim to understand the ancient Kemetic belief system will never understand it without Moses, because Moses was taught to think like an Egyptian. From the time that he was adopted from the daughter of Pharaoh to the time that he ran away from Egypt, and had his first encounter with the true God who created the heavens and the earth. The Israelites, and I must stress this again, also thought like Egyptians. And they're about to show you in the next verse of Exodus chapter 32. And so Moses, in mocking the Egyptians, has also preserved how the Egyptians thought and what the Egyptians believed. The Egyptians believed in one God. This fallacy that they believed in multiple gods, it is not my belief that that is true. They believed in one God. But if you do not understand what the Apostle Paul wrote in Romans chapter 1, you will come away with the distortion of your own ignorance. This is what Paul says about the Egyptians, and not only the Egyptians, about the Babylonians, and not only the Babylonians, about the Canaanites as well. The three major religions talked about in the scriptures, the writings of Moses and the prophets. Paul says this: for the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who hold the truth in unrighteousness. In a lie. They hold the truth in a lie, because that which may be known of God or about God is manifest in them. It's revealed in them, for God have showed it. What is the it? That is the truth. He showed them the truth. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse, because that when they knew God, I already told you, God had already shown them the truth. And if God had already shown them the truth, the Egyptians believed that there was one God. They glorified him not as God, just like many people do about Jesus Christ today. I hear it all over TikTok. Neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened, professing themselves to be wise. And this is where that statement, Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians. They became fools. And what did they do? And changed the glory, that is light, which is the truth, of the uncorruptible God into an image made like creation. He says, into an image made like to corruptible man, that's Pharaoh, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. And what he is telling you is the Egyptians believed in one God who was invisible. They could not physically see him. So they corrupted the truth concerning him by making him into an image like corruptible man. The Israelites did the same thing when they rejected God. That's why we had Saul and David sit in the place of our king, that is Yahuwah, the creator of heaven and earth. The Israelites, with some influence by Eli's sons, who were corrupt priests, but the Israelites rejected God from being their king, and they wanted kings that they could see, just like the Egyptians. Who was the Egyptians' king? Pharaoh. Who was Pharaoh? Pharaoh was believed to be a god, the physical manifestation of the invisible God. Keep that in your mind. Hold that, because we're going to talk about what God did. And just to bring up the fact, in Samuel, that is not the first time it is mentioned that they were going to reject God and ask for a king like the nations. If you read the curses, and if you read after Deuteronomy 28, you're going to see the same statement. God had already prophesied that they was going to do that when they got into the land of the Canaanites, the promised land that God gave to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One second here. So the Egyptians believed that this one God who was invisible, or who is invisible, cannot be can be seen, physically in his creation. That is corruptible man, birds, and all the animals that were created. This is why they believed that God was a bull, a male bull. who was the sun that floated from east to west, etc., etc. You see, this level of understanding you're not going to get from your pastors because they do not possess and are not in possession of the truth. They're spewing out things that come from Western Christianity. And those who are truly born again will be able to comprehend what I am saying because they have that unction in them that will agree with the statements that I make. And that unction will teach them, that is, point out to them the truth because the teaching was written on their heart. And it will be the same word that comes from my mouth. And so I don't have to teach you. All I have to do is point out the things that I see in the scriptures, and that unction in you is going to tell you that that's true. And you may not see it all right now, but the spirit in you will tell you and inform you of the truth. So I want you to consider this in Mark 8:22 through 25. This is a parabolic pantomime or an event that is like the opening of the eyes of the blind, both physically and mentally. And he, Jesus, cometh to Bethsaida, and they bring a blind man unto him and besought him to touch him, that is the blind man. And he took the blind man by the hand and led him out of the town. And when he had spit on his eyes and put his hands upon him, he asked him if he saw aught. And he looked up, that is the blind man, and said, I see. So he was blind. And after Jesus did what he did, this blind man says, I see men as trees walking, meaning that he wasn't able to see clearly, but he definitely began to see. And so what does Yahushua do? After that, he put his hands again upon his eyes and made him look up, and he was restored and saw every man clearly. Those who are truly born again and hear my words, they may not be able to see it clearly, but they see it. And if they continue to listen to the teachings that I believe God called me to point out, they will see everything clearly. So the Egyptians distorted the true knowledge of who God is by making the image of him like creation, that is corruptible man, Pharaoh, Osiris, Ra, those human figures that you see on the walls, birds, and all the animals. And what do you see in the Egyptian temple walls? And what have they written in their papyrus? They gave you their beliefs, what they believed. This is why the Israelites asked Aaron to make them gods, plural. And what did Aaron make? Let's take a look. And he took from their hand, that is the gold earrings, the gold nose rings, whatever gold they had, and he formed him, notice the singular, with an engraving tool, and he made him, notice the singular, a molten male bull. And they said, watch this, these are your gods, Israel, which caused you to go up from the land of Egypt,